Have you ever seen a moment so fragile, so unexpected, that it felt like destiny had carefully placed you there for a reason? That's exactly what happened to Michael, a single dad who had spent years locking his heart away, never thinking it would open again. But life has its own ways of surprising us. And before I take you into the depths of this emotional journey, let me remind you, if stories of kindness, second chances, and miracles touch your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Kindness Stories right now. Because what you're about to hear might just change the way you believe in love. Michael was 38, a hardworking single father raising his little daughter Emily in a quiet town in Ohio. Since his wife passed away 5 years ago, he had built walls around his heart. Every day was about work, about paying bills, about giving Emily the kind of love she lost from her mother. But at night, when the house grew quiet, he often stared at the ceiling, wondering if life would ever feel full again. One rainy evening, while leaving the local grocery store, Michael noticed a young woman sitting on the bench outside, shivering under the weak shelter of the awning. Her clothes were soaked, her hair plastered to her face, and her eyes, those were the saddest eyes he had ever seen. She looked lost, broken, and utterly alone. He couldn't just walk past. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who genuinely cared. The woman looked up, startled. Her name was Grace. She was 26, and from the very first moment, Michael felt there was more behind her silence than just a bad day. Her lips trembled as she whispered, I have nowhere to go tonight." Michael hesitated. He wasn't the type to invite strangers home, especially with Emily waiting. But something about Grace felt different. Like she wasn't a threat, but rather someone who desperately needed to be saved. And Michael had always been the kind of man who couldn't ignore someone in need. "Come with me," he said gently. "You can't stay out here in this storm." Grace resisted at first, ashamed of her situation, but the sincerity in his eyes convinced her. Soon, she was sitting in his modest living room, wrapped in a blanket, sipping a cup of tea. Emily peeked out curiously from the hallway, her big brown eyes blinking at the stranger who seemed just as fragile as a porcelain doll. Over the next few hours, Grace opened up in bits and pieces. She had fled a toxic relationship. She had been humiliated, hurt, and left with nothing but her handbag and the clothes on her back. She had no family nearby, no friend to call, and no money in her account. Her voice broke when she said, "I don't even know where to go from here." Michael felt a strange ache in his heart. He knew that kind of loneliness, that crushing emptiness of losing everything. He saw himself in her brokenness. Later that night, Emily fell asleep on the couch, and Grace sat quietly, her head resting against the armrest, exhausted from the storm inside her. But when Michael offered her a pillow and blanket for the guest room, Grace simply whispered, "Can I just stay here a little while? I haven't felt safe in so long." Without thinking, Michael nodded. She shifted closer, her trembling body finally surrendering to the comfort of another soul who cared. And then, without realizing it, Grace fell asleep in his arms. Michael froze at first, surprised by the weight of her trust. He looked down at her peaceful face, the tears dried on her cheeks, and something inside him stirred, a protective tenderness he hadn't felt in years. He didn't move. He just let her rest, holding her like she was something fragile that the world had broken, but he wanted to fix. As the rain drummed against the windows, Michael sat awake for hours, wondering why fate had brought Grace to him. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he couldn't ignore the thought, was this the moment that would change everything? Morning sunlight crept through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the living room. Michael blinked his tired eyes, realizing he had dozed off while sitting upright. And then he felt the weight still against his chest. Grace. She was still there. Her head rested just below his shoulder, her hair tangled, her breathing steady. For the first time in years, Michael felt a strange kind of peace, as if he wasn't alone anymore. He didn't want to wake her, but soon Grace stirred, blinking slowly. For a second, she looked confused, then embarrassed. She sat up quickly, brushing her hair back. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." Michael shook his head. "Don't apologize. You needed rest." Grace looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside her cracked open. Maybe it was the way he had protected her without asking for anything in return. Maybe it was the safety she felt in his presence, something she had never known before. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered words that stunned him. "Thank you, husband." Michael's eyes widened. He thought he misheard. But Grace's cheeks turned red, and she shook her head, covering her face with her hands. "I don't know why I said that," she murmured. It just slipped out. You feel like someone I should have had in my life all along. Someone who cares. Someone safe." The room grew silent. Emily walked in, rubbing her eyes, and climbed onto her father's lap. She looked at Grace and smiled, the innocent way children do when they know someone belongs. "Daddy, is she staying for breakfast?" Emily asked. Michael's throat tightened. He looked at Grace, who was still teary-eyed, and in that fragile moment, something unspoken passed between them. Grace wasn't just a stranger anymore. She wasn't just someone who needed shelter. She was someone who had already carved her place into their lives without even trying. Breakfast was simple, scrambled eggs and toast, but it felt like a feast shared by a family. Grace laughed for the first time in months when Emily spilled orange juice on the table, and Michael couldn't stop watching the way her smile lit up the room. By the time Grace left that afternoon, promising to figure out her next steps, Michael felt a hollow ache. He realized he didn't want her to walk out of their lives. And as she closed the door, Grace turned back, her eyes soft. "Thank you, Michael. Last night, I felt like I wasn't alone for the first time in years. You and Emily, you made me feel like home." From that day forward, Grace and Michael's paths kept crossing. She became part of Emily's laughter, part of the little dinners at their kitchen table, part of the healing Michael never thought possible. And while Grace had called him husband by accident that first morning, deep down, she knew it wasn't a mistake at all. It was her heart speaking the truth before her mind could catch up. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes, it shows up on a rainy night, in a quiet home, when two broken souls finally find the arms they were always meant to rest in. And maybe, just maybe, that's when you realize that what slipped out as an accident was actually the beginning of forever. So if this story touched your heart, if you believe in love that heals and kindness that changes lives, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Kindness Stories for more. Because somewhere out there, just like Michael and Grace, someone is waiting for their moment of unexpected love.